Stop the peaker! Stop the Peabody peaker! Stop the Peabody peaker! Stop the Peabody peaker!
Peakers are some of the dirtiest fossil fuel power plants currently in existence. They only fire up a few days a year, and then during hours of peak demand for electricity, which tend to be the hottest summer days. Peakers create a huge amount of greenhouse gases, which directly heat up the climate. They cost a fortune to maintain because they have to be able to run when needed, causing electricity prices to spike. They put clouds of toxins in the air we breathe, and depending on wind and weather conditions, these toxic plumes can drift as much as 10 miles, contributing to major health impacts. In October 2020, I learned through an anonymous tip that the state of Massachusetts had just issued an air quality permit for a brand new fossil fuel, oil, and gas power plant to be built in Peabody, Massachusetts. Really what I had in front of me was this Department of Environmental Protection permit with a date that said August ? So it was not even clear, how many days from that date all of the public comment was needed and what the process was. So I just started digging. The name was the first thing that I noticed. It was being referred to as 2015A, absolutely no indicator of what the technology was, what the fuel source was, who the entity was that was building it. And I started with Google 2015A, and that took me into the bowels of the New England ISO, which is our grid operator and forward capacity markets. Lots of agendas and minutes from municipal utilities. There are 14 that were ultimately signed on, committed to this as project participants.
Municipal light plants are public utilities in the sense that their primary client are residents, not shareholders in some corporate boardroom. They typically are supposed to be more public, more civic-oriented, because they are serving the residents as ratepayers directly. And the problem with the Project 2015A is that it was shrouded in all of the secrecy. And that really undermines the whole idea of a municipal light plant really serving the residents in democratic, transparent ways.
Wakefield Municipal Gas and Light Department is one of 40 municipal utilities in Massachusetts, and we have an elected board of commissioners. So 5 elected commissioners make all of the decision. It's a publicly owned utility. I went to 2 people that I knew there and I asked them about this. I handed them the DEP permit and I asked them about this. They had never heard of it. They went to their general manager and asked what this was and were informed and ultimately passed to me the information that it had been approved in 2015 with a subsequent vote taken in 2017 and that it was a done deal. It was a closed contract. There is something called the MEPA, which is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. Projects of this type have to be reviewed for environmental impact under MEPA. The then Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs made the decision upon review that this project did not rise to a full environmental assessment. But in doing so, he did reference that it would need to go to the Conservation Commission in Peabody and a couple of other permits that were required. And so I started digging into those. I discovered that Conservation Commission had never taken the issue up. I called the Conservation Commission. They had never heard of it. I called local state representatives and senators. They had never heard of it. It just kept leading nowhere.
We got a call at the end of 2020 that were we aware that there was this project for a third peaker plant in Peabody. We were not aware. We'd not been made aware by the city or by MWECC.
MWECC stands for Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, which is building the Peabody power plant. MWECC was formed in 1969 to represent the interests of municipal utilities. In 1976, the Massachusetts legislature changed it to a nonprofit public corporation and political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It is governed by a 12-member board of directors that includes 2 board members appointed by the governor. It has broad authority to own, develop, finance, and bond electric power projects and natural gas pipelines on behalf of its municipal utility members.
We were made aware that the application by Mass Municipal Wholesale Electric was before the Department of Public Utilities. I was a little stunned that MWECC didn't give any notice officially, nothing to the town of Danvers to this day.
My correspondence with MWECC has been mostly a few phone conversations with their director. We did send a letter to them because we had received some questions from our ward councilor over in Ward 3, and she had some concerns, that were, brought to her attention by neighbors, and they kind of wanted to know what the construction schedule was and what was going on. Was the permitting issued locally? Have they done what they need to do?
I think PMLP and every municipal light plant are doing their best. I think that this was MWECC 100%. I think MWECC was driving this train.
Understanding that most folks did not know about this project, we offered to highlight it in our monthly newsletter, which goes out to over 80,000 Massachusetts residents who already care about climate and environmental action. So it was our way to put this on the radar across the state.
It was when the Sierra Club actually informed us. No, I mean, in a way, that was the most appalling part. This plant had been bought into by 14 different municipal light departments, and no one in any of them knew about it. That became the first line of protest. There was no public vetting, there was no stakeholder engagement. You'd think they'd want to engage people.
It was clear that the community in Peabody didn't know much about it yet. And that led me to write a letter to the editor in Peabody Patch and post on various social media pages, on Facebook and all that, to kind of say, hey folks, do you know that this is happening? Do you have questions? Do you want to talk more about it? And invited folks to a first meeting. A lot of the community members who came to that first meeting, there were about 18 folks, became the founding members of Breathe Clean North Shore. We talked through what was going on, explained what this facility was going to look like and do to the community, and kind of asked them if they wanted to organize. And a lot of them said they wanted to come together and form a group to push back.
And we started to try to find out more information. And we got increasingly frustrated because you couldn't get information if you just searched for Peabody Peaker. You had to know the code of what they called the project, which was Special Project 2015A. And once we had that information, that code, then we began to find a trail of information about that it is an 8-year-old plan, that people didn't know about it, that there really had not been public meetings where people could learn about it.
A couple of advocates contacted us and said, are you aware of this, 2015A project? We were not aware of it. So we immediately scheduled a meeting with MWECC. We got that meeting pretty quick. And they told us exactly that they had filed in 2015. That's why the project is Project 2015A. What they were planning on doing, that they had received almost all of their permitting, except for the DPU, the Department of Public Utilities, who, as you know, grants the permit to finance the project.
After the first DPU meeting, many of us showed up and gave testimony. And it was within a week or two that MWECC announced that they were putting a hold on the DPU process and going to listen to the community. So I really believe that something happened with the DPU. They either heard us or the DPU said, we can't move forward until you can prove to us that you have held in good faith, a real community meeting, not just saying it was on every agenda in the state as a 2015A for meetings that, frankly, nobody shows up to, and only about half of the utilities even post. And so they stopped the process, and they did this May meeting in 2021.
So we will be presenting what 2015A is and is not.
And it was many, many hours. Frankly, the first hour and a half, they talked at us and told us why this made so much sense. And then they opened it up to public input, and the input was outrage.
In the community of Peabody, there are already 2 natural gas peaker generators, 3 locations of toxic release, 15 air pollution sources, and 85 sources of hazardous waste. Before another polluting facility moves forward, there needs to be an assessment of the cumulative impact that this will have on community members in Peabody.
Within a couple of weeks, they started the process back up, promptly got DPU approval, and we're off and running.
In May 2021, MWECC filed papers with the Department of Public Utilities to seek approval for the financing of this dirty peaker plant. Massachusetts Climate Action Network filed for what is called intervenor status with the Department of Public Utilities. And what that status does, it gives an organization, it gives an individual full legal standing in a DPU process. And what that means is that nobody was protecting the ratepayers in the 14 municipal utility communities whose MLPs, whose light plants had signed the contract to participate in 2015A.
Given that MCAN was the source of information, that MCAN's advocacy put this in front of people, it was all the more shocking that the Department of Public Utilities said, no MCAN, you may not be an intervenor in this application. You don't represent ratepayers. And yet, the ratepayers would not have known about it had it not been for MCAN. And that should not be lost on anyone.
So the problem with this project is that in 2021, the United States should not be building new gas plants, understanding that we already are reaching our limit for the amount of carbon we can be throwing in the air in the next 10 years. This project is planning to put carbon in the air for the next 30 years, which is something we absolutely cannot do.
Holyoke and Chicopee dropped out of the project. They essentially exercised their exit clause, which means that they put their percentage on the open market. And so if there's another municipal utility or an investor-owned utility that wants to pick that up and wants to use it as a hedge or use it to fulfill their obligations, they can. I understand that no one has picked it up. I actually did just hear this week that they did get an offer that was very under market. Wakefield's already spent about $1 million. And unless they can get somebody else to buy their contract out, so another utility to buy out their contract, they are locked in. And they have to pay for this whether they take the capacity or not. It's a terrible situation.
This project would never be economically viable if we took the true costs of the project into account, right? Let's talk about climate costs. Well, you can take that out because you can say, well, the rest of the world is wrecking the world, so we're allowed to in Peabody as well. That's fine if that's your, but then let's talk about the health costs. Let's talk about the pollution and impacts on the folks in the neighborhood. And then you can say, oh, it's only running for 329 hours a year. So then let's talk about $85 million for 329 hours a year that we could supply from offshore wind. Who's making these decisions? Who's benefiting? Who are the people who are making money from this? And that's the piece that you really have to look at because it doesn't make any sense except for somebody who's making a profit. Who are they?
People should know that Massachusetts is looked at as a leader in climate. Governor Baker signed into law one of the most powerful climate bills in the country to dramatically reduce carbon pollution and protect public health. That's why it doesn't make any sense that MWECC and a group of municipal utilities are allowed to quietly move ahead on building a fossil fuel power plant that will be owned for 30 years in a recognized environmental justice area. All of the health professionals I've spoken with, in addition to legislators and environmentalists, recognize the health hazards of building this plant.
I was completely shocked that in the heart of the community I work in, that a new gas power plant was slated to be constructed. To put a power plant in a neighborhood that already has a lot of chronic illnesses will cause a lot of people to get sick and a lot of people to die.
They're sick and harmed already by the existing plants. This plant will only add to the harm.
Once again, a dirty facility is being proposed to be built in the middle of an environmental justice neighborhood.
He actually codified environmental justice in state law by passing the Next Generation Climate Roadmap bill, and Governor Baker signed it into law.
What we found is that almost simultaneously with getting this plant permitted, they also went to ISO with a plan for a 100 megawatt battery facility, which is exactly what we are being proactive about. Battery facilities is what we want. And ISO New England said, nope, you can't do that battery facility. Well, why ISO can't we? Well, because of the minimum price law. The energy coming from that battery facility would way underprice the fossil fuels we're selling now.
This is the reason why Sierra Club and our allies are working right now very hard to get an immediate elimination of the minimum offer price rule to help stop developments like this here in Massachusetts and throughout New England. The way that the markets are structured is that they privilege existing and planned fossil fuel generation over existing and planned renewable energy. And they do it simply because the people making the rules for a long time been part of the fossil fuel industry.
10 municipal light plants across the state already have battery technology in their community. They are using this and they are doing so effectively.
It is feasible for this site, it is cheaper, and it is cleaner.
Why are we investing in an old, outdated, harmful technology?
There should be a new look taken at it.
That's what we keep telling people. You invest in this plant, and you will not even be able to give away this energy once offshore wind is on and being stored in batteries.
To build a renewable energy project is going to cost you a lot of money up front. That's why we subsidize it. But once the project is built, it operates, it generates electricity at a much lower cost for decades, as opposed to a fossil fuel generation plant. Why? Because we don't pay for fuel, and that's a huge cost.
We are standing outside of the office of Secretary Katie Theoharides. We are here to deliver a petition which was signed by over 1,200 people asking her and the Baker administration to conduct further investigation into the environmental and health impacts of this project.
The governor of the Commonwealth has the authority to direct the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs to do this assessment that we're asking.
We ask that you follow your own rules and stop investing in fossil fuels.
Thank you for coming out to greet us.
Do your job! Do your job! Do your job! Do your job! Do your job!
We've protested, we've marched, we've done so many forms of activism, and it's like nobody's listening. And we, in this day and age, we cannot build any more fossil fuel infrastructure, period.
Where do you say no more fossil fuels, no more infrastructure, no more fossil fuel industry? This is my line in the sand.
We're striking and we're serious about our demands.
We got together and started our hunger strike, and the next day was an event at the steakhouse. So that was more than a full day of not eating and showing up and, walking some and really have no idea about how he's going to feel.
These are people who are fasting. And they're thinking about food, but they're going to talk to you about clean energy.
All right, well, we have a shocking story to tell you about how that bad decision by the ISO to roll back renewables for another 2 years is connected to dirty fossil fuel plants like the one that they're trying to build right now over in Peabody.
It was Judith and Nathan who came up with the idea and sent out an email asking for support. And I thought, I'm 70 and I'm healthy, and my reason for doing it is because I can. I'm a privileged person living in America. I can do this.
It's the kind of action that I believe I'm strong enough to do, and that also seemed like it would be effective.
That's really extreme to do a hunger strike. I give these people a tremendous amount of credit of putting their health in harm's way.
We have tried everything that's political. We've tried everything that's polite. We've tried everything that's logical.
Wake up! Wake up!
Government has failed us. Industry has failed us. Business has failed us. And all we have is each other.
Get up! Get down! leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Marblehead Raleigh was awesome. I mean, that's a smallish town, and it was a good crowd. Filled the sidewalk. There's a lot of cars going by. Sort of a homecoming. Bringing it home to Marblehead was the first time we went to a town that was part of this contract. Marblehead actually, in a lot of ways, has been a leader on clean energy transition, so we were surprised that they got into this peaker deal.
We have this letter for MWECC. We asked for an appointment, and they said because of COVID restrictions, we may not come in.
Going to visit the headquarters of MWECC, which at first looked like it was just a mailbox in a industrial park. We couldn't even tell where it was. Really seemed to reinforce the exclusion of the average person in any decisions about what's happening. Like, we have no power. This is the message. You have no power. This is too big. This is too complicated. Leave it to us. You don't know what you're talking about, right? You couldn't even advise us if you wanted to, because look at this fortress, right? You can't even get inside here.
Here we are at ISO headquarters trying to get in.
Stood outside of the gates of ISO New England, the grid operator, tried to see the big boss, and he wasn't available. They sent out their public relations person.
We're on a hunger strike. 6 of us here, actually more than 6, but 6 who are on an extended hunger strike, and we're on day 4, and one of our demands is for the ISO to rescind that really terrible ruling on the.
So do you understand where that is in the process now? The ISO will file that at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and then the FERC will make a decision.
You know, I think he was pretty honest with us, including what he was not going to tell us. Which is, one thing was not who the internal monitors are, even though he knew, because they make decisions, and we'd like to know what the decisions were based on. But if you don't even know who's on the internal monitoring team, you're certainly not going to see their documentation of their decision making.
There is a movement. It is clearly gaining force every day. We are making things happen.
We are on day 5 of this hunger strike, so if I look a little wobbly, perhaps that's why.
Next, we went to South Hadley, which is also a town that has bought into the peaker plant to financially invest in it and get energy as a result of that.
South Hadley could rethink our involvement in this project and reimagine another way forward. While it may not be easy, it would be worth it. The future of our planet and the health of so many people, so many children is at stake.
So we went to another town that's invested in the peaker plant, Holden, which is a suburb of Worcester. It was similar to South Hadley, some hunks in opposition, but mostly in support. We were able to go into the communities that are part of this decision. So I think it was important for us to see the places that we are engaging with.
Stand up and tell them you're here. Shout it out loud for the whole world to hear.
Peabody's pretty moving because that's where this is being built. We got tons of support, friends, people who have had children that I haven't seen in a while, hugs and baby strollers. With the sign that said, "We deserve a future," which is what this is all about.
Hey, hey, ho, ho, fossil fuels have got to go, hey, hey.
As we get ready to celebrate our first year anniversary, we remain committed and continue to ask Governor Baker and Secretary Theohardis to do their job and follow their own rules. Stop burning fossil fuels and protect our environmental justice neighborhoods from further pollution. Thank you to the strikers for your sacrifice and your stamina, and to all of you for adding your voice to ours.
Do we want a livable planet for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren? This peaker plant built would be another nail in the coffin of a livable future. In our society, it appears that power and profit are more important than people. Government has failed us. Business has failed us. Industry has failed us. We are left with each other. We must be the change.
The Rep and I today were able to get a meeting with the director of MIPA, and we've asked for a meeting with the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, Secretary Theorides. We're hopeful that we will get that meeting. It was a very good meeting. We learned quite a bit.
You know, they were very respectful, and so were we. And they didn't make the rules. The person who's the director of MIPA doesn't write the rule book. She's enforcing it. And our point was, number one, there's been no transparency, as you've all said. Number two, there have been tremendous changes since 2015. Battery storage is a real thing. And they have this process where you can maybe make some kind of an appeal to recognize changes that have occurred since the initial application. And number three, you can't say that you're for climate change action, and you can't say that you embrace a clean energy future and then say, oh, yeah, that peaker. No. So we have to use the tools at hand to revisit what could be a very bad deal for Peabody ratepayers.
What do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Now.
The hunger strikers are demonstrating just how serious the climate emergency is. And when, we can talk in abstract terms about emissions, we can talk in terms of, buying capacity on the open market, but what has humbled me and inspired me is that these people are demonstrating, many of them 70 years and older, demonstrating the risk involved in continuing to put off decisions about a better future. And their hunger strike is a clear and compelling call to action to keep this campaign going. And allowing MWECC to move forward unchallenged is just not acceptable.
Construction on the peaker plant started mid-April of 2022. And in addition to that, we now have a new secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Beth Card stepped in when Secretary Theorides moved on. Due to those two factors, it was time to really have another show of opposition to this project, ramp up our calls to the administration to do the health and environmental studies. And that's why we planned this big action in Peabody today on the Danvers Port Bridge to bring together folks from the North Shore and across the state and make it really clear. Governor Baker, Secretary Card, hundreds of people are calling for you to do your job and protect residents.
What do we do with fossil fuel? Keep it in the ground. Keep it in the ground. Keep it in the ground. Don't dig it up and don't drill down. Just keep it in the ground.
This is a day of action, a day of celebrating our right to breathe, a day of continuing to ask Governor Baker to do his job. Do your job.
Do your job.
Mark my words, this project will become a symbol of climate inaction for generations to come if it is built. This is not a cost issue. This is not a reliability issue. This is not an issue of inadequate alternatives. This is an issue of political weakness, and it is time for the state to act.
What was wrong with them? Why did they persist in a dated technology when all around us there are advances that lead to better clean energy options? So we're just asking for what we've asked for from the beginning. Oh, the nerve of us. We'd like a health and environmental impact study. Who do we think we are? Asking them to provide us with data and projections about how this will affect asthma rates. We're in a neighborhood with worse asthma rates than many areas around us. I just know that it's real. I know that it's unhealthy. I know that my town has been disrespected. I think all the ratepayers have been disrespected. And I am here to say the Commonwealth and MWECC owe my town, my constituents, all of us, a whole lot better than what they've given us.
During the last year, we have protested, lobbied, telephoned, emailed, marched, rallied, and chanted. 6 of us stopped eating. That's a lot of activism, and I thank you. But none of our actions to move the needle have stopped Massachusetts from building new ways to burn fossil fuel, including our proposed third gas and oil burning peaker plant over there along the Waters River.
The response to construction starting isn't, oh, we've lost, we'll give up now. The response is, we're gonna fight even harder because we don't want this in our communities. It's not too late to push back. It's not too late to say no more fossil fuels. And I think that, what we saw today is just evidence that that's how people across the state are feeling about this project.
So here we are in December 2022. I am pleased that the Department of Environmental Protection did hold a public meeting last week in Peabody, Massachusetts.
The scope of this hearing is to accept testimony and comments on whether the proposed decision for the MWECC project meets the requirements of 310 CMR 7.70.
It is only the second time that the public has been asked to come and give their opinions on this project, and they were anxious to be heard.
We, the communities of the Waters River, share the health impacts of living with cumulative environmental pollution resulting from industrial development around the Waters River for more than a century. BCNS has requested several times that PMLP provide information on when the existing plants run and what they are burning, to no avail. We continue to request that information in hopes of adding it to the data from Purple Air sensors that the Peabody Board of Health received with funding from the DEP, and to help identify how running the plants on different fuels contributes to our high rate of emergency room visits for asthma.
The environmental justice policy of the state's Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs calls for meaningful involvement of affected persons and communities, as well as the equitable distribution of energy and environmental benefits and burdens. We understand the benefits of the proposed plant in terms of ensuring adequate energy capacity in the region with stable and known costs. However, we believe that it is impossible to understand the potential burdens of this project, particularly on vulnerable and disproportionately impacted residents, without a full environmental impact report and comprehensive health impact assessment.
I'm asking that you please require a community health assessment. I don't know how you can make an honest decision regarding a Peabody peaker plant without a health assessment to consider how the peaker will affect the people who live in this area. They should not be considered collateral damage. Thank you.
We older people, we are not going to be here in 10, 15 years. But our children are, and our grandchildren are. And if we don't damn well start doing something, they're all going to be sick. And yes, I'm angry.
Last year, in the only public meeting for this project, the CEO of MWECC stated to the public that battery storage was not a viable option for peaking plant. However, 2 weeks prior to that only public meeting for the community, MWECC, in partnership with Andrada Corporation, had bid for a 100 megawatt lithium ion storage project called the Westover Energy Center. So that was not mentioned in what was told to the public. So there was some duplicity going on in basically trying to play both sides. So even the MWECC was aware and is aware that battery storage is the way to go. And I just wanted to make clear and on the public record that this whole process has been a deceptive one to the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is no way in 10 years this plant is going to be running. The crisis will deepen. This is not in favor of Peabody residents. This is not in favor of any residents. We have got to stop this plant, and we will do our part to stop this plant. This is not the end. We will continue, and the plant, even if it keeps running, will be shut down by us eventually. Thank you.
Thank you.
One outcome of this might be that we revisit the authority of MWECC and their process that was followed here. Should they not have been required to come before the community in a timely way?
We need more oversight than just bang the gavel. Yes, all of your finances work out. Here you go. Here's your permit. We can't do that anymore. So we intentionally put that in, that more oversight by DPU for exactly this scenario.
I think that the most important thing is keeping the dialogue open among all parties. The Breathe Clean North Shore Coalition is very thoughtful. They might not agree with everybody, or they might not agree with my position 100%, or they might not agree with some of my colleagues, but they are very sincere in their efforts.
This will be referred to for a long time as the case that, prompted greater transparency in these siting of projects.
The other thing that folks can do that can't be underestimated is support the local folks who are leading this fight. There are amazing activists in Peabody who are doing, and the surrounding adjacent communities who are working so hard to stop this project. And it's not just about Peabody. This is a benefit to all of us in Massachusetts if this expensive, dirty form of electricity doesn't get built.
I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. I've gotten to know so many people, young, old, different professions, different expertise that all came around this, and we all believe in the same thing, that we have to work together to combat climate change. And that building fossil fuel plants in Massachusetts is the absolute wrong thing to do. And I think that everybody else knows that now too.
We need to bring attention to this. So many people still don't know because of how the decision was made, but also contemporarily because of how we get our information. We all get it in silos. And so there'll be people who even now, despite endless publicity, won't know because they're not looking in the other silos. And we just have to figure out, how to start to mold those.
I mean, this planet is beautiful. It sustains us, and it sustains all life. We shouldn't be destroying it. Join a group and just sit and listen, and you will be inspired, and you will do action.
This is a great time of opportunity. How are we going to treat environmental justice areas in the future? What kinds of protections do they get?
I am extremely confident that no entity will again be able to sneak a project of this type through the system. We have formed coalitions, and now everybody is going to be watching the DEP, the DPU, MWECC, local municipal utilities. This will not happen again.